I want to start first by saying that from an ethical standpoint, I have nothing against the use of steroids as long as it's done like under supervision. That having been said, I will still say that for the average natural trainee, anabolic steroids have been probably the most damaging thing ever as far as learning how to train properly. I'll explain. The reason is that it is totally untrue that what works for an enhanced athlete, somebody who's using performance-enhancing drugs, will work just as well for someone who's natural. Now, the common belief in the world of training is that a natural athlete and a drug-using athlete can use the same program and they will respond the same way. The only difference is that the guy using drugs will have greater growth because of the product. In reality, it's not as simple as that, because when you're using anabolic steroids or other performance-enhancing drugs, you're basically changing the physiology of your body. So the body doesn't respond at all the same way to training, and you don't need to do the same type of training for maximum growth. So I will put a caveat and say that what is optimal for a natural trainee will still work great for a steroid user, but the opposite is not true. The program that works good on a steroid user might not work at all for a natural trainee. It might actually lead to loss of muscle. I'll explain why. Well, the main difference, the first difference, is that the natural athlete needs to use the training session itself to trigger protein synthesis. Building muscle is all about protein synthesis, which is building muscle. And the drug user, the person using performance-enhancing drugs, is basically in a state of elevated protein synthesis 24/7. Because that's what steroids do. They increase the rate of protein synthesis. So these people do not need to trigger maximum protein synthesis with the workout because it's already elevated. So right off the bat, any kind of training they do will work because protein synthesis is already on. Somebody who's natural, its normal state is a state of homeostasis. Basically, their body is balanced. Protein synthesis is at the same level as protein degradation. So basically, you're not building or losing muscle at rest. So what you need if you want to increase your muscle mass, you need to trigger protein synthesis by yourself because you don't have the products doing that for you. So you have to use a training session to do that. Now, this means that your training has to reach a certain threshold to trigger maximum protein synthesis. That means maximum muscle fiber recruitment, fiber fatigue, and activating mTOR. That's all fine and well. But the big problem is that you cannot afford to do anything that will inhibit protein synthesis, because all you have when you're natural to trigger protein synthesis is the workout. If you decrease the protein synthesis from the workout, then you don't have any opportunity during the week to make it better. So what you want is increase mTOR as much as possible, and you want to get rid of all these factors that can inhibit protein synthesis. And the main factor here is an increase in cortisol, as well as an increase in the enzyme called AMPK. These are the two things that will inhibit or even stop protein synthesis the most. So if you trigger these two things when you're training, you might very well stop completely the gains you tried to trigger with the training, right? So cortisol, why does it go up? Cortisol goes up because when you're training, you need to mobilize fuel, energy that is stored in the muscle or in the fat cells. The more energy you need to mobilize, the more cortisol you release. Now, cortisol will stop or greatly reduce protein synthesis, And it will also increase the expression of the myostatin gene. The more myostatin is expressed, the less muscle your body will allow you to build. So cortisol will stop muscle mass from growing with these two mechanisms. So if I'm doing a lot of volume, lots of sets, lots of reps, lots of exercises, in each workout, I'm burning more fuel, right? The more exercise I do, the more fuel I require. The more fuel I require, the more energy I need to mobilize, and the more energy I need to mobilize, the more cortisol I release. So that's the first big difference between enhanced and natural. The natural trainee cannot afford to do a lot of volume in a training session because it will increase cortisol a lot more. Now, an enhanced athlete will have some of the same problems, but the thing is that the anabolic hormones, which are derivative of testosterone, actually blunt the effect of cortisol. Because the androgens, testosterone or any other anabolic steroids taken, once they are linked to the receptors, they use the same second messenger at the cellular level as cortisol. So basically that means that the more anabolic hormones you have in your body, the less cortisol can do its job. So somebody who is using performance-enhancing drugs will not suffer as much from an increase in cortisol as the natural athlete will. So that's the first difference. An enhanced athlete can do a higher volume of work. And it's not even from a recovery perspective. It is from a protein synthesis perspective. Whereas a natural trainee cannot do as much volume. That's the main difference. The second difference is that the natural athlete needs to use the session to trigger protein synthesis. I already mentioned that. So it stands to reason that the more often I train a muscle, the more muscle growth I'll have. Think about it this way. If somebody is using steroids, protein synthesis is elevated 24/7 for the whole week. So it's always in muscle building mode. Even if I hit each muscle only once a week, since my body is always building muscle, it will be sufficient to trigger muscle growth. For a natural athlete, it won't really work because after a training session, protein synthesis is elevated for 24 to 36 hours in the muscle that was trained. So if I only train a muscle once a week, I'm basically building muscle only for a day and a half. Compare that to the 7 days for somebody who's enhanced. So if the natural trainee trains each muscle only once a week, he cannot expect maximum or even rapid muscle growth. He needs to hit each muscle at least twice a week, ideally 3 times a week. That way, protein synthesis will be elevated in that muscle for most of the week. Now you have to understand, if you're natural, your recovery capacity is lower. And that just proves my initial point about volume. If I'm training a muscle often, I cannot train it with as much volume. So for a natural athlete, lower volume per session and more frequent session. The third difference is in regard to the load used, how much weight you're using. Now, you can still lift heavy if you're enhanced, of course, but the danger, the risk of injury is greater if you're enhanced versus if you're natural. The reason is that anabolic steroids make the muscle become a lot stronger, a lot faster than the tendons. Also, the androgens, all steroids that are highly androgenic, increases the capacity of the nervous system to recruit the muscle fibers. So you become a lot stronger super fast. The tendons do not have time to catch up. So you're a lot more at risk of pulls and strains because of that. Whereas a natural trainee, the nervous system, muscle, and tendons will grow at pretty much the same rate. So you could lift heavier with less risk of injury as someone using steroids. Not to mention that some steroids can actually make the tendons more brittle, more fragile. So that would be the third difference. also worth mentioning that somebody who's using anabolic steroids will respond really well to doing very high reps, just pump work, right? Because pump work will shuttle nutrients inside that muscle. The more volume I do, very high reps, the more fluid, the more blood will come inside the muscle, the pump. That will send nutrients that is inside the blood, inside the muscle. So somebody who is already at a high rate of protein synthesis, all you need to do is send those nutrients inside the muscle. That's why just lighter pump work works great for enhanced athletes, because they don't need to trigger protein synthesis. And by doing the pump work, they are sending a ton of nutrients inside that muscle, taking advantage of that enhanced protein synthesis. But that same thing don't work for natural, because maximum pump, light weights, sets of 10, 15, 20 reps, superset, giant set, drop sets, that won't work well for the natural trainee. Why? Because I'm burning too much fuel. I'm burning too much glycogen to get the stimulation. And the more glycogen I burn, the more cortisol goes up. And that affects negatively the natural trainee. So that's the third difference. Natural trainees should focus more on heavier weights. The set of 6 to 8 reps, for example, or even sometimes 3 to 5 reps. Whereas the enhanced athlete can do more pump work with higher reps, drop sets, rest pauses, stuff like that, and will get a lot more benefit than the natural trainee. So as you can see, even though you can say, well, both guys need to train hard. That's true. But the same type of work that works great for enhanced athlete will not work great for natural. And that's one big mistake that natural trainees do. They look at the training of the big successful bodybuilders and they just try to copy the style of training. That just won't work. It will give them a great pump during the workout, but it will not translate into solid tissue gain over the long run. So as you can see, higher frequency, much lower volume, higher intensity. These are the 3 things you need to focus on if you're training without the help of performance enhancing drugs.